John Locke warned us, society trains men like dogs. Men are not dogs to be trained, but individuals born for liberty. These words, penned by John Locke over 3 centuries ago, cut through our comfortable illusions about modern freedom. What if the autonomy you believe you possess is merely a sophisticated illusion? What if the choices you make daily, from your career path to your relationship patterns, are not truly your own, but carefully conditioned responses installed through societal programming? Locke warned us of this danger long before our hyper-socialized, attention-engineered world came into being. His concern was not merely philosophical speculation, but a profound insight into human nature and the inherent threat posed by social structures that reward conformity while punishing independent thought. You believe yourself free, yet you respond to the same rewards and punishments as a well-trained canine. The salary increase that makes you work harder. The social validation that shapes your opinions. The fear of rejection that keeps you silent when you should speak. These are your treats and your shocks, the invisible leash that guides you through life's maze. What makes this conditioning so insidious is not its existence. All societies require some level of social cohesion, but rather our collective denial of its depth and power. We imagine ourselves as autonomous agents making rational choices, when in reality, most of our decisions emerge from conditioned reflexes, installed so deeply we mistake them for our authentic selves. Locke understood something profound about human development that modern psychology has only recently begun to articulate. The formation of the self occurs within a web of social expectations, rewards, and punishments that shape us from our earliest moments. Our educational systems, designed to produce productive citizens rather than independent thinkers, reinforce these patterns. Our workplaces further solidify them. Our social media environments perfect them. The discipline of desire, Locke wrote, in his treatises on education, is the background of character. But whose desires are you disciplining? Are they truly your own, or are they implanted suggestions, wants and cravings engineered to keep you productive, consumptive, and most importantly, predictable? The most effective prison is one where the inmates believe themselves free. The most perfect form of control is one where the controlled believe themselves autonomous. This is not conspiracy, but psychology, the inevitable outcome of social systems that prioritize stability over authenticity, conformity over selfhood, productivity over purpose. What would Locke make of our modern condition, of men who spend their lives pursuing status symbols they've been taught to desire, of relationships formed according to scripts written by popular culture, of beliefs adopted not through critical thinking, but through social contagion? He would recognize in our sophisticated society the same fundamental patterns he observed in his own time, the transformation of potential individuals into predictable units, trained to respond reliably to the right signals. The first step toward genuine freedom is recognizing the leash. Not to tear it away, that comes later, but simply to acknowledge its existence, to see how deeply the conditioning penetrates, to question which of your desires are truly your own, and which were installed to make you useful to systems that care nothing for your authentic self. John Locke was not merely a political theorist, but a physician and keen observer of human development. In his Some Thoughts Concerning Education, he outlined how easily young minds can be molded through consistent application of pleasure and pain, a process he viewed with deep ambivalence. While necessary for basic socialization, Locke saw how this same mechanism could extend beyond childhood to create adults who mistake their conditioning for choice. Consider how our modern systems of education and work are architected. From your earliest school days, you learn to respond to the bell, to seek approval through grades, to suppress your natural rhythms in favor of institutional schedules. Later, in the workplace, these same patterns continued. The performance review replacing the report card, the promotion replacing the gold star. The methods evolved in sophistication, but the underlying mechanism remained identical. Behavior shaped through carefully administered reward and punishment. The mind is receptive to certain influences, Locke observed, particularly in the formative years. What he could not have anticipated was how modern institutions would extend these formative years indefinitely, creating environments where adults remain perpetually in states of development, their personalities and values constantly reshaped by sophisticated feedback systems designed to optimize them not for freedom, but for functional utility. The tragedy lies not in the existence of social conditioning, some form of it is inevitable in any society, but in its invisible operation. You cannot resist what you do not perceive. You cannot question what you have been taught is natural and inevitable. The architecture of obedience works best when mistaken for the natural order of things. Locke's particular genius was recognizing that the most effective form of control is not direct coercion, but the careful engineering of desire itself. Why force men to work when you can make them want to work? Why demand conformity when you can make the rewards of fitting in so tantalizing that deviation feels like self-sabotage? This insight, that humans can be trained to desire their own subjugation, runs through Locke's work like a warning bell. It appears in his political writings where he cautions against governments that infantilize their citizens. It emerges in his educational theories, where he worries about instruction that creates dependency rather than autonomy. It surfaces in his epistemology, where he questions how received ideas can shape perception itself. The modern manifestation of this architecture surrounds you entirely. The carefully calibrated dopamine hits of social media, the status games of consumer culture, the performance metrics that reduce your complex humanity to quantifiable outputs. Each represents not just a tool, but a training mechanism, a way of shaping behavior so subtly that the subject experiences external direction as internal motivation. Liberty, Locke wrote, is to be free from restraint and violence from others. But what happens when the restraints have been internalized? When the violence has been replaced with pleasure? When the walls of your prison are constructed from your own engineered desires? This is the perfection of control, not to crush resistance, but to make it unthinkable. What would genuine freedom look like in contrast to this sophisticated conditioning? Not the absence of all structure, Locke was no anarchist, but rather conscious participation in the structures that shape us. Not the rejection of all social influence, but the ability to recognize this influence and subject it to critical examination, not isolation, but authentic connection based on self-knowledge rather than performed identity. The most unsettling aspect of Locke's warning isn't that society trains men like dogs. It's that this training creates what we mistakenly identify as our self. The personality you believe is inherently you may in fact be largely a collection of conditioned responses, assembled to function smoothly within specific social and economic contexts. Locke's empiricism led him to a profound insight, that the mind begins as a blank slate, or tabula rasa, shaped through experience and association. While modern neuroscience has complicated this view, recognizing innate predispositions, the core insight remains devastatingly relevant. Much of what you consider your personality, your tastes, your aspirations, your values, has been written upon you rather than emerging organically from within. Consider how your concept of success was formed. Did it arise from deep personal reflection, or was it absorbed from cultural narratives, parental expectations, and educational institutions? The career you pursue, the relationships you form, even the leisure activities you enjoy, how many of these truly reflect your authentic desires rather than conditioned preferences optimized for social approval? The actions of men are the best interpreters of their thoughts, Locke observed. But what if your actions themselves have been programmed through careful conditioning? What if the thoughts they interpret are not truly yours, but implanted through sophisticated social engineering? This creates an epistemological crisis. How can you know your authentic self when the very tools of self-knowledge have been shaped by the same conditioning you seek to transcend? The manufactured self exists primarily to function within existing power structures. It is designed not for your fulfillment, but for your utility. The perfect employee, the ideal consumer, the good citizen. These are not neutral archetypes, but carefully engineered social products. The traits most rewarded in modern society: adaptability, agreeableness, productivity, consumptive capacity, coincidentally align perfectly with what makes a person valuable to economic and political systems. Locke's political philosophy centered on consent as the basis of legitimate authority. Yet what meaning can consent have when your very preferences, the basis upon which you consent, have been manufactured by the systems seeking your agreement? This is the ultimate subversion of autonomy. Not to override your will, but to shape it so completely that your choices reliably serve interests not your own. The depth of this conditioning explains why attempts at personal transformation so often fail. Surface-level changes, a new job, a new relationship, a new location, rarely address the fundamental programming. The script may change, but the actor remains the same. True transformation requires not adding new behaviors, but excavating the foundations of the conditioned self to discover what authentic desires might lie beneath. This is not to suggest that everything about your personality is artificial. Locke himself recognized innate tendencies and capacities. Rather, it suggests that the authentic and the conditioned have become so thoroughly intertwined that separating them requires extraordinary awareness. The project of genuine selfhood begins with this uncomfortable recognition. Much of what you take for granted as you may in fact be carefully installed programming. The revolutionary potential of Locke's insight lies precisely here, in the possibility of discrimination between the authentic and the conditioned. Once you recognize the manufactured aspects of self, you gain the capacity to consciously accept or reject them. This is not complete freedom from social influence. No such freedom exists, but rather the transformative power of choosing which influences will shape you. What would John Locke prescribe as the antidote to this sophisticated conditioning? Not isolation from society. He understood humans as inherently social beings, but rather a radical recommitment to conscious awareness and intentional living. The path toward authentic freedom begins not with grand external revolutions, but with the quieter, more challenging work of intellectual self-determination. Locke's epistemology offers the first tool of liberation: radical questioning. "It is one thing to show a man that he is in error," he wrote, "and another to put him in possession of truth." Before alternative possibilities can emerge, the conditioned certainties must be suspended. This means systematically examining your most basic assumptions. What constitutes success? What makes a good life? What forms of work and relationship truly serve your flourishing rather than your functional utility to systems of power? This questioning is not abstract intellectual exercise, but practical self-archaeology. Each conditioned response, each reflexive reaction, each unexamined preference, each automatic judgment becomes an opportunity for investigation. Where did this belief originate? Whom does it ultimately serve? Does it align with your deepest values, or does it merely make you more predictable, more productive, more controllable? The improvement of understanding is for two ends, Locke observed. First, for our own increase of knowledge. Secondly, to enable us to deliver and make out that knowledge to others. This points to the second aspect of liberation: finding community that supports authentic development, rather than enforcing conformity. The truly liberated individual does not retreat from social connection, but transforms it, creating relationships based on mutual recognition rather than mutual performance. Locke's political philosophy offers a third principle: the right to self-determination. Applied to personal development, this suggests that true freedom requires establishing appropriate boundaries around your consciousness. Just as a nation protects its borders, the sovereign individual must become increasingly selective about the influences permitted to shape their mind. This means consciously curating your information environment, your relationships, and your activities, not out of fear, but from a position of responsible self-governance. What emerges from this process is not the isolated, atomistic individual of caricature, but rather what Locke might recognize as truly human, a being capable of conscious choice rather than conditioned reaction. The difference is not in what is done, but in how and why it is done. The same career pursued from authentic desire rather than conditioned ambition becomes transformed. The same relationship entered freely rather than from scripted expectation becomes genuine connection. The end of law, Locke wrote, is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. Similarly, the goal of authentic development is not to eliminate all social influence, an impossible and undesirable aim, but rather to transform your relationship to that influence, to move from unconscious reaction to conscious response, from automated behavior to intentional action, from being trained to being self-directed. The ultimate promise of Locke's warning is paradoxical. By recognizing the depth of your conditioning, you gain the possibility of genuine choice. By acknowledging how thoroughly society has shaped you, you take the first step toward authentic selfhood. The leash becomes visible, not so it can be dramatically cast aside in some performative rebellion, but so it can be thoughtfully evaluated, its beneficial aspects retained, and its limiting aspects transcended. This is not a journey with a fixed destination, but an ongoing process of awakening. Each moment of awareness creates new possibilities. Each conscious choice builds capacity for the next. This is Locke's true legacy, not just his political theories that helped form modern democracies, but his deeper insight into human nature. That liberty begins not with external circumstances, but with the internal condition of the mind. The most radical act of freedom is simply this: to become aware of your conditioning and, in that awareness, to discover choice.